Hello everyone, welcome to first tutorial of BB101 Molecular Cellular Biology. I hope you enjoyed the first theory lecture given by Professor Sanjeeva Srivastav. In this tutorial, we will revisit some of the basic concepts from the lecture. If you have any queries, please note down and we can discuss them at the end of this tutorial. Starting with the cell, that is the structural and functional unit of life. What atoms are to chemistry, cells are to biology. Now, every living thing is made up of a cell. The living organism could be unicellular or single-celled or multicellular. So cell is like the building block of life. In case of unicellular organisms, the single cell performs all the functions, whereas in case of multicellular organisms, the same function is divided among different parts or different clusters of the cell. The cells form tissues, tissues form organs, organs form organ system, and the organ system forms the entire organism. Now, broadly, cells are of two kinds, prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are more primitive kind of cell, and eukaryotic cells are more advanced kind of cell. So let's see what does that mean. This is a general overview of a prokaryotic cell. One thing that is common to all the cells is that they have a plasma membrane. Plasma membrane is a membrane that defines the structure of any cell. And the space inside the plasma membrane is filled with semi-fluid jelly-like substance called the cytosol. So this is common to both kind of cells, the prokaryotic cell and the eukaryotic cell. But the prokaryotic cells are very simple, very basic kind of cells. They do not have any compartments, different compartments to perform different functions. The genetic material, the DNA lies freely in the cytosol of the cell, and it is concentrated in a region called the nucleoid. Then there are ribosomes that help in synthesizing proteins. So there are no membrane-bound organelles in case of prokaryotic cells. Everything is performed in this single compartment in the cell, inside the cell. In some of the prokaryotic cells, there is an additional outer layer or coating outside the plasma membrane, which is called the capsule. And then there are flagella for locomotion and these small, tiny hair-like structures called fimbriae, which are for attachment onto other surfaces. Now, the bacteria, all the bacteria have this kind of structure. So all the bacteria are prokaryotic cells. On the other hand, eukaryotic cells are more advanced and complicated in the sense that there are different compartments and the different compartments perform different functions. So there is division of labor inside the cell. All the organelles are membrane bound. For example, the nucleus. The nucleus has the genetic material, the DNA, which stores all the information. Then there is endoplasmic reticulum, which is involved in the various synthetic and metabolic processes. And then there is Golgi apparatus, which is also involved in synthesis and secretion of various cell products. Then there is mitochondria, where respiration occurs and energy is generated. So this is called the powerhouse of the cell. There is lysosome. Lysosomes have digestive enzymes and hydrolytic environment where various molecules, macromolecules are hydrolyzed. Again, there is a plasma membrane, and inside the plasma membrane is cytosol, the the semi-fluid like substance, and inside the cytosol, in the cytosol, all these membrane-bound organelles are suspended. Some of the eukaryotic cells also have flagella for locomotion. And everything other than bacteria, like protists, fungi, plants, and animals, they are composed of eukaryotic cells. Protists are unicellular eukaryotic cells. The basic structure is same for all these species, but there are certain differences among the different domains. For example, a plant cell differs from an animal cell. Like in addition to what we discussed, plant cells also have chloroplasts, which gives it the green color, and chloroplasts are also required for photosynthesis. And then there is a large vacuole in the center of the cell. Plant cells have, outside to the plasma membrane, they have a rigid covering called the cell wall that is made up of cellulose and other polysaccharides. And this cell wall is important to maintain the shape of the cell and protect the cell from mechanical damage, and also to maintain osmotic pressure. So while animal cells can be flexible, plant cells are more rigid. So that was about cells. Now, most of the major portion of the living thing, the living organisms, are made up of 4 types of organic biomolecules. They are nucleic acids, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Now, we'll review each one of these one by one. Starting with nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are polymers of nucleotides. So this is the nucleotide structure. It is composed of a sugar molecule attached to which is a phosphate group, and to the other side is a nitrogenous base. Now, these nucleotides polymerize to form nucleic acids, and DNA, that is deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, that is ribonucleic acid, are the 2 kinds of nucleic acids that we have. The DNA encodes for RNA, and RNA further encodes, like RNA has the information for the synthesis of proteins. And this is called the central dogma of life. That is, DNA acts as a template for the synthesis of RNA in a process called transcription. And this process happens inside the nucleus. Then the RNA that is formed is transported to the cytoplasm, and there the RNA dictates the synthesis of proteins in a process called translation. And this happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. The proteins are the like workhorses of the cell. They perform various functions. This is called the central dogma of life because this is how the DNA, the information that is stored in the DNA is transmitted to proteins which perform all the functions. So let's look at some more details of DNA, that is deoxyribonucleic acid. As the name suggests, it has a deoxyribose for the sugar moiety, and again it has a phosphate group and nitrogenous base. The DNA is double-stranded, that is 2 strands of DNA come together and they form a helical structure, which further inside the cell, like in eukaryotic cells, this double helical structure of DNA heavily coils onto itself with the help of some proteins to form the chromosome, because otherwise the DNA strand would be too long This coiling and supercoiling is important to accommodate the very large DNA strands into the nucleus. The nitrogenous bases in DNA are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, or ATGC. And the sequence of these bases sort of acts like the code for the information that is stored in the DNA. The double-stranded DNA is stabilized by with the help of hydrogen bonds that form between the nitrogenous bases. So adenine always pairs with thymine via 2 hydrogen bonding, while guanine pairs with cytosine via 3 hydrogen bonding, 3 hydrogen bonds. Now, here's some interesting facts about our DNA sequence. You might have heard that we share almost 99% of our DNA with other people. And with our parents and siblings and offsprings, that percentage increases to like even 99.5% or more. Our close ancestors, chimpanzees, we share our DNA sequence with them, 98% of our DNA sequence with them. And even with say cabbage, there is 40 to 50% of sequence similarity between our DNA sequence and this DNA sequence of cabbage. Next up is RNA, or ribonucleic acid. In RNA, the sugar is ribonucleic acid, as opposed to deoxyribonucleic acid in DNA. And otherwise, the structure is same. It also has a phosphate group and nitrogenous base. There is one more difference in RNA, and that is DNA had guanine, thymine, adenine, and cytosine, while the bases in RNA are guanine, uracil, adenine, and cytosine. So there is no thymine in RNA. RNA is synthesized by transcription from the DNA. So DNA acts as the template on which the RNA is synthesized, and that is how the information from the DNA is transferred to RNA. Now there are three types of RNA: messenger RNA, ribosomal RNA, and transfer RNA. Ribosomal RNA and transfer RNA are involved in the synthesis of proteins, while messenger RNA is the one that contains the information for the synthesis of proteins. That is, it encodes for proteins. Talking about proteins, proteins are large molecules. They are also polymers made up of amino acids, and they are the workhorses of the cell. They perform all bodily functions, most of the bodily functions. And the sequence is determined by DNA and transmitted by RNA. And the sequence of the amino acid present determines the structure of the protein, and the structure of the protein is absolutely important for the function of the protein. So let's talk about the levels of protein structure. This is the primary structure of protein. The sequence of amino acids, the linear sequence of amino acids is the primary structure of the protein, which further forms the secondary structure. So the hydrogen bonds are formed among different amino acids, and they arrange themselves into secondary structures like alpha helix and beta pleated sheath. Further, the secondary structures folds upon itself in a three-dimensional manner and form the tertiary structure. And two or more such tertiary structures come together to form the quaternary structure of the protein, because many proteins are multi-units. That is, they have two or more identical protein units in them. So the spatial organization of the different tertiary structures of proteins make up the quaternary structure of the protein. Now, as I said, the structure of the protein is very important for its function. And knowing the structure of the protein, elucidating the structure of the protein is a great challenge in the field of biology. There is this company called DeepMind, which was once acquired by Google, that has attempted to solve this problem by using artificial intelligence. They have created this system called AlphaFold, which predicts the shape of the proteins. And this has enormous potential in the field of biology, because knowing the structure helps determine how the protein works and what it does. And this explains the biological processes better. And this will also help in development in finding new medicines and tackling various diseases. Proteins perform a variety of functions. For example, they have enzymatic action. Various proteins are enzymes. They catalyze various reactions in the body. For example, the digestive enzymes that catalyze the hydrolysis of bonds present in food molecules. Then there are storage proteins, like the casein, the protein present in the milk. Also, many of the hormones are proteins. For example, insulin. Insulin is a hormone that is secreted by pancreas, and it helps the tissues to take up glucose. Then proteins also have contractile and motor functions. For example, the proteins present in our muscle, actin and myosin. Then there are defensive proteins, the ones involved in immune response, for example, antibodies. We also have transport proteins that are involved in transport of substances across cell membrane and across different channels. For example, hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is an iron-containing protein which transports oxygen from lungs to other parts of the body. Then there are receptor proteins. Receptor proteins are involved in cell-to-cell communication. And lastly, proteins also have structural functions. For example, the protein in our hair, that is keratin, in the nails. Then there is collagen, which is an abundant protein in the connective tissue. Next up is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are polymers of sugar molecules. And carbohydrates are mainly for providing energy, but they're also involved in some structural functions. So the carbs that we ingest are mostly polymers, and they are digested by our body and converted into monomers. And from those monomers, energy is acquired by the cell. Carbohydrates are also involved in some structural and functional activities. For example, many proteins and lipids have sugar molecules as a part of their structure, and they aid in their function. Like the sugar molecules are attached to many proteins and lipids, forming glycoproteins and glycolipids, and they help in their function. Lastly, we have lipids, also called fats. Now, these are not polymers. So far, whatever we have discussed, nucleic acids, proteins, and carbohydrates, they were polymers. But lipids are large biomolecules considered as macromolecules because of their hydrophobic trait. So they are composed of long hydrocarbon chains ranging from C4 to C36, and they have energy storage and structural roles. Talking about the structural roles of lipids, they form a major part of the cell membrane. The characteristic feature of such lipids is that they have a hydrophilic head on one end and a hydrophobic tail on the other. So in an aqueous environment, they arrange themselves in a double-layered manner with hydrophilic head towards the aqueous surface and the hydrophilic tail towards the inside. So this is the structure of our plasma membrane. Talking about the energy stored in carbohydrates versus fats, since more number of carbon atoms are present in fats, they have more energy, like they release more energy as compared to carbohydrates. And that is why whatever extra carb that you eat is converted into fat and stored in your body, because otherwise carbohydrates will take up more space than lipids. So it's more like storage optimization that your body is performing. Lastly, there is the concept of cell division. Cell division is a very important biological process because it serves three purposes: growth, repair, and differentiation. Every living organism has to grow in order to survive. Even if it is not increasing in size, it has to repair its old cells and replace them with new ones, for which cell division is important. Then there is differentiation. In higher organisms, different cells perform different functions. Like we have blood cells, we have muscle cells, we have liver cells. These cells are specialized cells. And in order to attain that kind of specialization, the cells differentiate. So differentiation is basically the process of attainment of that level of specialization. So we have stem cells that are unspecialized cells, and they divide and differentiate to form more specialized cells. Now, there are two types of cell division: mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis is normal cell division in which the daughter cells, the cells that are formed after division, are identical to the parent cell. So there is equal distribution of the chromosomes, and the number of chromosomes in the daughter cells is also equal to that in the parent cell. On the other hand, meiosis is different from mitosis in the sense that the daughter cells formed after division are not identical to the parent cells. They have half the amount of chromosomes present in the parent cells. The daughter cells have half the amount of chromosomes present in the parent cells. So that is why meiosis is mainly involved in production of germ cells, that is the sperms and eggs, because they have to have half the amount of chromosomes, so that after fertilization, the number of chromosomes are restored. Coming to the most important part of why we are studying biology, the real life applications. The real life applications of biology are far-reaching. For example, scientists have successfully developed an artificial retina utilizing the concept of how an actual eye works. So you can imagine the impact of this artificial retina on the society. In this artificial retina, there is a small camera which is linked to a microprocessor. And so the image captured in that camera is converted into an electric impulse, and that is transmitted to the nerves, and that's how it works. Another interesting example is that of the smartwatches that we have today. Were you aware that the Apple Watch 4 is actually an FDA approved class 2 medical device? It can record ECG, that is electrocardiogram, and monitoring the heartbeat can monitoring the heartbeat can actually be very helpful in risk prediction, in prediction of cardiovascular risk. And this can also detect any kind of abnormalities in your heart rhythm, uh, and it can detect hypertension and sleep apnea. Now you're aware that there are many other such smartwatches available in the market. Maybe not having FDA approval, but they still perform several functions related to health. They can monitor some aspects of health. And the amount of data that they generate, that these smart wearables generate, is uh, it's almost impossible for any human doctor to review it. Analyzing such huge amount of data requires computational power, and that's where this company, Cardiogram, is utilizing artificial intelligence and deep learning to analyze such data. And maybe in the future, we'll have more such applications to monitor health, like glucose monitoring, blood pressure, oxygen levels, respiration rate, and even Parkinson's disease diagnosis and monitoring. Lastly, as we talked about DNA, now you know that all the information about us is contained in our DNA. And our DNA holds huge power. How we react to something, how we react to any drug, why we develop some kind of disease, all that information is contained in our DNA. Even our metabolism, how we react to exercise, all this information is contained in DNA. And with the advancements in technology, it is now possible to sequence the DNA at affordable cost. And this company, this is an Indian company, Map My Genome, which does the same. They sequence the DNA and provide information regarding any predisposition to any disease, regarding drug response, nutrition and diet, metabolism, and immunity. Again, sequencing DNA generates huge amount of data because our DNA is billions of bases long. And this requires computational power to analyze that data. So these were just some examples to get you interested in biology, because biological understanding leads to new technologies, and new technologies facilitates biological understanding. This is kind of the partnership between biology and technology, and it can make huge societal impact. And here's a little something for inspiration. Steve Jobs said that the biggest innovations of the 21st century will be at the intersection of biology and technology. And with that, I thank you for listening. Now we can have some questions and discussion. Thank you.
Manisha. Yuvraj. Just a second. Yeah,
I
you
just
can.
wanted to ask, are we supposed to understand things or are we also supposed to remember things?
Biology is a mix of understanding and remembering. Some things like species names and what you call a particular organelle and how the kingdoms differ, you'll have to learn, but you'll have to understand the concepts also. So
Can you
it's
mark
a mix of both.
things which we are supposed to learn as important or something?
So you will be given all the kind of handouts, like you are being given everything that sir is teaching, and even like today's this particular recording will also be given, and even the tutorial video will be given to you. So
Uh,
once you start going through the course, now you'll understand what you need to actually retain. And like if you're asking for the next quiz, it will be a very basic quiz, so you'll have to know what are prokaryotes, what are eukaryotes, what are
like in
proteins.
eukaryotic cells, there were too many names and stuff. So do we have to remember all them, all of them?
Yes, like each of the organelle has its own function. So start by understanding what the organelle names are and what they do. You might not, like, I think this was earlier covered in 11th or 12th, sorry, 10th class also, in your 10th class, but you might not be remembering it. I understand it won't take you much time to cover this, but yes, you will have to remember all those organelles and all.
Okay, thank you.
So it will be better if you follow the Campbell. Most of our stuff is taken from there, all the material is taken from there. Now anyone wants to ask any further queries? Yuvraj, you can lower your hand. Utkarsh, Utkarsh Jindal. Yeah, you can speak.
You can
What
unmute.
is the folded DNA in chromosomes?
Can you repeat?
In chromosomes, what force stabilizes the folded DNA or RNA strand?
Yeah. I'll just share my screen, show you the video once again, like where the slide was, and I'll explain. So, yeah, you see, this is the slide. So, there are many kinds of interactions in a DNA molecule. First, a DNA molecule is a polymer. So, it is made up of many nucleotides. So, this is one nucleotide, and each nucleotide is attached to the next nucleotide in the chain with a bond. Okay, this is a covalent bond. And now, in this way, one string will be formed, and then there is one more string which has complementary bases. Now, these complementary bases will have hydrogen interactions, hydrogen bonds. So, between G and C, there will be 3 bonds, and between A and T, there will be 2 bonds. And you should note that the polarity, like if phosphate group is present on this side for this chain, then the phosphate group will be present on this side for the chain that is being bonded with this chain. In this way, the double helix is formed. Because of the way the bonds are formed, the two chains form a helix-like structure. Okay, and this helix is wrapped around histone proteins. So DNA is generally negatively charged in nature, and the histone proteins are positively charged. So the DNA gets bound with them and then forms this bead-like structure. So these bead-like structure form like a, you can say like a ornament, pearl necklace kind of a thing. And then they are further coiled, and like you should think that they are getting further and further packed inside of each other because of various kind of interactions that I have explained till now. And then further condensation happens and they form the chromosome just before cell division. Does that clarify your doubt?
Yes, yes. And in my GE preparation, I had heard of some ratio between the AT and GC what is that?
Yes, so as I explained here, G will always pair with C and A will always pair with T. So that implies in a DNA molecule, the number of G and A, the sum of G and A would always be equal to the sum of C and T.
Okay, okay.
Okay, anyone else having doubts? Manisha, any doubts? If not,
Nobody raised.
okay, it's okay. If not, then we'll start with a few interactive discussions. So, my screen is visible now.
Yes, it's visible.
So these are just a few problems that are day-to-day problems and which we think can be solved by biology. And I'll just give you, I'll present you the problem and you'll have to let me know why, what is the idea behind it or why this is working or not working, okay? So our first problem will be related to fluid-filled chocolates. So what are fluid-filled chocolates? These chocolates have a hard chocolate covering on the outside and have an inner soft and gooey core. So how are these formed? Like just imagine to make this, you have to pour hot melted chocolate onto the core. And the core should be solid so that the shape is maintained. But then how, when they are actually selling it to us, the core is soft and outer covering is hard. So there is a process here, an industrial process to make this, where the core is made of certain flavoring substances and whatever they want to add, plus sucrose, which is the main component, and then sucrase. Sucrase is a kind of enzyme which digests sucrose to create fructose and glucose. The fructose and glucose have higher solubility and hence they form this liquidy kind of structure. Okay, so once the core is made, it is hardened and then hot molten chocolate around the temperature of 42 to 55 is poured on it. Then the chocolates are kept at 35 to 37 degrees Celsius for the chocolates to activate, for the enzyme to activate, sorry. And this leads to the soft core. Now the problem is, unfortunately, in a few batches, a solid core chocolates were obtained. Now, engineers have identified that the molten chocolate covering temperature was above 45 degrees while pouring. Now, can any one of you let me know what happened and what went wrong?
There's a hand.
Yes, can you give me your
You can
name?
speak.
Enzyme got damaged, maybe
How it got damaged?
with high temperature.
Yes, yes. So the word here we are looking for, your answer is absolutely right. The word we are looking for is it got denatured. So enzymes are proteins, right? So sucrase enzyme is stable at 32 to 45 degrees Celsius. And activity we know 35 to 37. But what happened when we poured more, hot chocolate, which was more than 45 degrees? What happened was the sucrase enzyme got heated and lost its activity. So here you see the active enzyme got converted into a denatured protein. That's why the whole reaction could not occur and we got a solid core. Okay, so moving on to the next problem. This is one for where we talk about hair straightening. So just a bit of background. So hair is made up of keratin, and keratin is rich in sulfur containing amino acids, and one such amino acid is cysteine. Okay, so cysteine has a lot of sulfur in this side chain, amino acid side chain, and these sulfur from various cysteines form cross bonds like disulfide bonds, and that leads to this kind of like wavy structure in your hair. Okay, so if someone has curly hair, they have these bonds between in their hair. So now what you have to do, you are a scientist in a cosmetic industry, you are asked to formulate a hair straightening therapy. So what will your approach be? I don't need any specific reagents or what you will exactly do, just what approach you will take, you can explain here.
Guys,
Any
try to
hand?
answer.
Yeah, any hands raised? Like I explained the concept, so you just need to apply the concept here. It's quite easy, I think.
Yeah, Utkarsh has raised.
Yeah, Utkarsh.
You can unmute yourself.
I believe we only need to break the disulfide linkages.
Yes, yes. And how do you think we can break those disulfide linkages?
Uh, like we did in that coagulation thing in class 12, I think we can do some similar treatment.
Okay, so what did you use there? Like what kind of agent did you use? Agent or reagent or what you used?
And that it was of some specific charge, so we introduced another thing of opposite charge.
Yeah. You're getting very close. So your answer is almost right. What we have to do is we want to break the disulfide bonds. So this can be broken by using either heat. Heat always breaks bonds, or we can give hair some kind of a reducing agent which will break the disulfide bonds. Now, once the disulfide bonds are broken, the hair will become relaxed. But now we need to ensure that they don't coil again later. Then the bonds are not reformed. So in the relaxed position itself, we want to reform the disulfide bonds. This will be done by adding a suitable oxidizing agent, and the bonds will be reformed when the hair is straight. So this results in permanent hair straightening. Okay, so I think it's clear now.
Can you please
Now,
repeat that?
do you want to say something, Manisha?
No.
Okay.
I'm asking, can you please repeat?
Okay. So I am saying, so here you see your hair has disulfide bonds, and it is curly because there are bonds between the curls. Okay, like this is one strand of hair we are talking about. In there are several strands of keratin. Now, if I break the disulfide bonds and we make the hair straight, we'll break the disulfide bonds using reducing agent. And now we have made the hair straight. If you don't remake the disulfide bonds yourself, the bonds will be later remade when the hair itself heals. Okay. So what we do is we again add an oxidizing agent when the hair is like pin straight. Okay, so then it results in this like straight hair, which does not curl easily. That's why these keratin treatment and everything, these take a lot of money because they are using many kind of reagents on your hair. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Earlier you had said that in the hair which has this disulfide linkage, it
Yeah.
is always curly.
No, that is not true. So the way in which I had said that there are disulfide bonds in your hair, and the way in which the disulfide bonds are formed results in the shape of your hair. Okay, so if someone has curly hairs, their disulfide bonds are more cross-linked, and if someone has straight hairs, their hair also has disulfide bonds, maybe lesser number, or in such a manner that the hair is not getting curled.
Okay.
So we'll move on to our next concept, which is called biomimicry. Biomimicry is when in any kind of invention is made by inspiration from nature or natural objects or biology. So Here is an example of Velcro, which was first invented by George de Mestral. He was inspired by looking at these seeds of the cockleburr plant called burr. So these plant have spikes on this seed has spikes on it, and he saw that his dog would carry them on his coat when he went through certain fields and all. So then he took a particular seed and looked it under microscope, and he was intrigued. So he was originally an engineer, and he was intrigued and quite inspired to see this. From watching this, he developed the Velcro, where one part of the Velcro has these hook-like structures and the second part has this loop-like structures in which the hooks go and engage. So another example of biomimicry is the Japanese bullet train. Originally, when the Japanese bullet train was introduced, it had high speed, but whenever it went through a tunnel, it created a loud boom because it was not very aerodynamically made. So the scientists then took inspiration from kingfisher's sharp beak and how it tears through the water surface when it goes to take its prey. And they created a similar kind of design, and then they saw that the efficiency of the train was increased by 10 to 15%, and the train also became quite like noiseless. Now I'll give you one or two pictures and you have to tell me like what might have inspired these. These biology things inspired what kind of creations. So gecko, lizard, toe pads. Any guesses? Any guesses, guys? You can keep it interactive. We are here to interact. This is not a lecture, it's a
Guys,
tutorial.
please raise your hand. Don't chat.
Yeah, I am not able to see the chat, so it won't be useful if you write in chat. Anyone can raise their hand. Okay, so Manisha, you can. No one has raised hands now. Okay, so any general answer from the chat?
Yeah, one has raised. 1 second. Lakshmi, you can speak. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, any vacuum device which stays in one place.
Yeah. Like vacuum suction cups or something like that, na?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, quite a good answer. Any other answers? Like actually, it's not necessary that what pictures I'm showing should be the right answer. How people draw inspiration from a particular picture is different for everyone. So the most famous example here would be the climbing pads that were designed based on the gecko's toe tips to climb on this glass glass walls or something like that, adhesive tapes, and even like right now Lakshmi mentioned something like suction cups or something like that. Next image is that of a lotus leaf. Any guesses? I think this was taken by sir in his lecture also.
Yeah, there's a raised hand.
Yeah.
You can unmute yourself.
Hydrophobic material like for dresses or like when you use paints for on clothes or something. It repels water and stuff.
Yes, very good. So we have, like he said, we have hydrophobic garments or materials, and then we have water repelling paint, then we have self-cleaning glass. So these are just a few examples. The applications are many. Now, one particular problem that I would think we all know, and we like, if you put your thought into it, just think about how much digital, like how much data we are creating every day. whether it is based on the social media platforms or whatever kind of apps we are using. It is, and even if you think about all the research work that is going on, like in the past 1 year for COVID, how much research has been done and at what pace. So like that has led to so much data being accumulated, and this data, storing this data is becoming a problem. So people are trying to find alternative methods. We now, like, coming from floppy disk, CDs, pen drives, hard disks, now we have come to cloud storage also, but sooner or later we need an even more efficient way of storing data. So do you think data can be stored in DNA? And why do you think DNA, not just any other biomolecule, just DNA? Why?
Please unmute yourself.
Yes, so digital data is stored in the form of series of bits, and in DNA also we have a series of bases. So it
Yes.
can be presented in terms of 0001, 10, and 11.
Yes.
So we can store it. I think RNA can also be used.
Yes. So, like, my next question was going to be this, but you have given a very good answer. And like, why do you think we have sided more towards DNA than RNA? Any particular point that comes to your mind?
It could be more stable.
Yes, true. So RNA in its own, in its original form, is quite reactive as compared to DNA. RNA is also known to more frequent mutations. So if we want to store data, it should be more stable, and hence we have chosen DNA. And as just now he explained, sorry, I didn't ask your name. So just now, as you explained, we change the binary data into the nucleobase code. So we first take our data, we convert into the binary code, then we change it into nucleobase code, and then according to the code that has been formed, we synthesize DNA. And once we want to read the particular data, we sequence the DNA, decode it into binary format, and run it on our PCs. So one particular example is the Biohackers or Netflix original series. It is a Netflix original series, and it is the first one to be stored in form of DNA. You can go and search about this. I think it will be very interesting for you guys. So right now we have 2 more minutes. I'll take one more problem. So 1 or 2 more problems. Let's see. So imagine you are the principal investigator on a case. Okay, so now we are at a crime scene. There are no bloodstains to be seen. To add to the matter, you observe the place has been recently cleaned. Which of the following will you use to look for washed bloodstains? Okay, so here you need to remind yourself a bit of what blood has, what components blood has, and I am showing you a few options here just to make things a bit easier for you. Hydrogen peroxide. It is a kind of oxidizer and bleaching agent, and also used as an antiseptic. Dark light or UV light, which makes things which are not visible in normal light also glow and look more visible. And then there is luminol, which reacts with trace amounts of oxidizing agent and glows in dark. So now, any guesses from your side?
Please unmute.
Luminol,
Yeah, what is your name?
Pravalika.
So what does luminol react with in blood?
I don't know. I just thought that for cleaning, blood should be oxidized, so it reacts with oxidizing agent.
Okay, but then you are saying it will react with the cleaning agent or the blood? Blood.
No, the cleaning agent.
So actually, yeah, that is one of the concerns. It sometimes does react with the cleaning agent. But it is mostly used in the crime scene and it is a very well-known agent, luminol. So first you should understand that blood has lot of RBCs and RBCs have hemoglobin and hemoglobin has iron. And what luminol needs is a bit of oxidizing agent, like some kind of metal, okay? So this trace amounts of iron can be detected by luminol, and when in a dark room, if you are doing this luminol reaction, if you spray all over the room, you will see the blood stains. Okay, it will be visible like this. And if the stains are not very well visible, you can take the UV light and then it will be better glowing. Okay. Now, next problem. This is a big oil company's ship has spilled a lot of oil in the ocean while transporting. The oil forms a layer over the marine water and leads to harmful effects for the marine life. Can you think of any solution to this? So just to give you guys a hint, we are talking about bioremediation here. It is the use of living organisms like bacteria or microbes to remove contaminants from environment. So now let me know what kind of an organism are you going to use to clean up all this mess?
Just guess.
Anaerobic.
Just keep it more simple. Like, what do you think? We need to clean what?
Oil.
Yeah, then the particular organism should do what?
It should feed on oil.
Yes, that is the perfect answer. So we can use any kind of organism which feeds on oil. So there are many bacteria like Alcanivorox or Marinobacter that feed on oil and thrive if oil is fed to them. So this has not been actually tested. I don't know whether it has been tested or not on such a large scale, but studies have been done and these bacteria are quite efficient in doing this, cleaning the oil from water. And we hope this will be more beneficial in the future. Okay, how much time do we have? Okay, sorry, I took more time. We can finish, either we can take this last question or we can finish the tutorial. It's up to you guys. Okay, we'll finish this here. You can stop the recording, Manisha.
Okay.